All right, folks, welcome back. We're once again looking at the tropics here this morning. Again, Saturday, September 24th, 2022. This is your long form update, kind of our more laid back weather talking version of the update video. If you want the latest on Tropical Storm Ian without all the mumbo jumbo, we have a quick version, 5 minutes or less, on the wall and on the page. Please go check it out there. That will be the best video for the latest update without all the extra stuff. But this is the long form video, so click at your own peril. So look at Atlantic Basin today, guys. Man, it is a busy time right now. We flipped that switch in a hurry. We went from nothing to a storm pretty much every single spot you can have one that's not around the Atlantic high. We have Tropical Storm Gaston in the Azores Islands, bringing them some uncomfortable weather. Hermine is some sheared mess off the coast of Africa. This isn't really going to impact anybody, but it did steal the name from Ian, so we get the dreaded I storm, which a lot of times in our hurricane history, I storms have been retired at a rate double of any other name. It just seems to be like that's the perfect time of the year where the strongest storms form, and they always have like I names, Irma and Ivan, and there's a lot of I names that have been retired for the last couple of decades. And then we have the impacts of what was Fiona, a now completely transitioned extratropical storm that is just lashing eastern Canada. I mean, the damage coming out of eastern Canada is pretty amazing, and that storm is a generational type impact to the region. So definitely a bad time up there. But we're going to focus again on tropical storm Ian today. That remains the most likely threat to the eastern U.S. going into next week. The morning video kind of covered a lot of this, the latest from the Hurricane Center this morning. And the Hurricane Center is adjusting slowly based on these westward trends we're seeing with the computer models. So I don't think this is necessarily done shifting either. The short term forecast uncertainty is coming from the fact that Ian is actually a little bit south of what we've been thinking it was. The low level center is actually down at like 13 degrees north. They had it at 14.4, but I think it's even a little bit further south of that. The hurricane hunters are finding it even a bit further south. So the short-term southerly trends, instead of the storm moving more up like this, it's more moving like this. And the further west this tracks before it begins to make this turn to the north around the ridge is important, because if you pull the storm one away from Cuba, you're talking about less land impact, although western Cuba is not much of a speed bump for these storms. It's pretty minimal. Remember Ida across Cuba, and it took 6 hours for the storm to recover. But storms that move off in this area between the Yucatan and Cuba just historically are pretty strong. But the further west Ian goes in the short term, it's going to impact the long term track quite a bit, because there is a considerable amount of spread. I mean, the Hurricane Center's forecast cone of uncertainty lies, between Key West and Pensacola. I mean, there's a huge spread at the end of the forecast track here. Pretty much anywhere in western Florida could still be getting the storm. But let's go ahead and look at the short term stuff right now. This is the morning satellite imagery of Ian, and a much better looking storm than we've seen so far. The convection began to blow up last night along that southwest flank and has continued today to expand. We have the circulation center. There's actually two different cloud layers here. If we look carefully, we'll see that there is an inflow of low level clouds going up under these bright clouds, which are your high clouds, your high thunderstorms moving in. The center of Ian is somewhere right up under here, and then the mid-level center is more over here under the more robust thunderstorm activity. We can see here on the as the daytime comes in, these popcorn clouds and these little spiral bands coming in. The mid-level center is probably somewhere over here, and the low-level center is probably somewhere over here. So you have this displacement between your low and mid-level centers, and that's one of the things Ian's going to have to correct before the storm can really intensify. That's why today the Hurricane Center only has us at 45-mile-an-hour winds. The morning recon data kind of showed that there just wasn't a whole lot of wind going on. It was kind of a disheveled mess. The hurricane hunters flew around, and they aren't finding a ton of impressive winds with the storm. And again, you can see the low and mid-level center. These are flight level winds up here. So you can see that the low level center stamped at 1006 at their last pass, but the mid level wind flow, the wind barbs out of the south right here, out of the northeast right here. So the mid level center is probably somewhere over here. So it's not only displaced to the west, but it's almost displaced to the south as well from where the low level center is. And these need to align before the storm can really take off. Your low and mid level centers aren't aligned. The storm, it's like imagine a top you try to spin a top, but it was leaning and it was rolling over itself. It's not going to be stable. That's what the storm has to correct in the short term. Looking at the water vapor to give us some short-term clues about Ian's environment, and we see that the environment is about to rapidly improve for Ian as it moves further off to the west. One thing we can see here is an upper level low moving in north of Cuba today, moving out of the Bahamas. You can see the wind shear associated with this upper trough coming through. This isn't a particularly strong upper low, but it will help influence Ian in the short term. One of the big things that jump out this morning is you have this trough pulling air this way. So you have an outflow channel beginning to expand to the north. You have all these cirrus clouds starting to extend in every direction, pretty much indicating that the wind shear is abating. Remember, this is the outflow from Fiona's remnants moving through into the Caribbean, the eastern Caribbean. This is what kept Ian down for the last few days, but the storm has tracked out of that and is now tracked into this improving environment. That's why thunderstorm activity is more robust. It's starting to build around the center of the storm, and you have another outflow channel to the south. So you've got this upper high building over Ian, you've got these dual outflow channels, one to the north, one to the south. That is prime real estate for a storm in terms of upper level winds. Now, this upper low may shear it just a little bit, but it doesn't look particularly strong, and I think Ian's probably going to bump this out of the way relatively quick. But this will be helpful in the short term, and then it may impact it a little bit. But if we look at the general environment as Ian moves off and begins to recurve up into the Western Caribbean and begins to gain latitude, this part of the Caribbean is exceptionally favorable. The oceanic heat content from the University of Miami, and just it's the warmest, deepest water there is around here. So this is why the Hurricane Center explicitly forecasts rapid intensification from tomorrow, pretty much morning, where we still think Ian will be a tropical storm tomorrow, and then they have it becoming almost a major hurricane by Monday night. This is the official discussion for the storm, and we can see here that 24 hours we think Ian will be a 65-mile-an-hour tropical storm, an upper end tropical storm. But look at how fast 80 to 100 within that next day, and then 115 by the day after that. So we think in 48 hours Ian will go from a mid-level tropical storm to a Category 3 hurricane, which is definitely into that rapid intensification criteria. They also they also note that the SHIPS model, which is a model that is typically a good performer for the potential for intensification and or rapid intensification, which is that pressure falling and the winds increasing quickly. The intensity guides unanimously support strengthening during the next several days, of course, and the ship's rapid intensification probabilities indicate a 67% chance of a 65 knot or about 75 mile an hour intensity increase in 72 hours. So the Hurricane Center is cranking this up about as fast as they can over the next couple of days, and that's definitely a bit concerning when they go that hard on their official forecast. Like typically they'll err on the side of caution, but that's not really the case at all this morning. So in the short term, we're watching, Ian's exact track, where exactly the center is, how fast more north-south does it go. And in the longer term, we got to start looking at the potential of this trough. So if you're looking at the computer models this morning, we remain in two different camps, but the models are slowly shifting. And believe it or not, they're actually shifting towards the GFS solution. So we're over here on Tropical Tidbits. I always like to plug the website. It's just fantastic. Levi Cowan runs the site. He's doing a lot of work trying to keep it working this morning because they are getting hammered with traffic, but it's running pretty smooth this morning. So awesome news there. So we'll take a look at the GFS and Euro real quick, so Air 50 millibar chart, and watch kind of see what happens. So the GFS pulls Ian off to the west, and even in the short term, even going to early Tuesday, look at the difference in the European and the GFS. They both intensify the storm. They both have the storm intensifying pretty quick, but the European model has this, starting to recurve into Cuba at the beginning of Tuesday, while the GFS already has this passing through the channel between the Yucatan and Cuba. They're both strong hurricanes. The GFS showing a stronger hurricane than the European is, but both of them are showing the storm moving, but already starting to split their differences as early as Tuesday, which is only a couple days from now. And this is all part of this upper trough that's going to be sitting over the eastern U.S. as we go into early next week. So we'll set this back to 12Z on Tuesday just to kind of show here. It's the models aren't disagreeing on the overall pattern. We know that there's going to be a ridge over the eastern or the central U.S. over the plains, and we'll have our Atlantic ridge over here along the the western Atlantic. You'll have this trough though dug into the eastern U.S. Now this is partially due to Fiona's remnants and just partially due to the strong trough moving in this time of year. As we start to see the transition season, we see these deeper troughs move in, more fall cold fronts, etc., etc. This trough is trying to pick Ian up and take it with it. What it's doing is it's eroding the edge of this high pressure ridge. So the high pressure ridge extends to about right here. You can see this 588 line kind of the edge of the high, and Ian is going to round the edge of the high. So this is the European model. This shows the trough deeper. Notice how the influence of the trough comes all the way down to about Florida, and the trough is a little bit further back. You draw the middle of the trough axis somewhere, probably right around northern Florida and up into the eastern U.S., where the GFS shows the trough a bit more progressive. The axis of the trough is actually a little bit further ahead. It's a little bit faster, and the axis of the high pressure is a little bit further over. So you're pushing Ian a little bit more to the west in the short term than you are on the euro. It's not much different, but it's subtle. But that little, like, watch the trough, like watch these numbers right here. Watch the differences. Notice how the GFS is a little bit further towards the coast, Europeans a little bit further back. Doesn't look like much right now, but if you run this out, several days from now, it can become a big deal. And the question really becomes is this trough going to capture Ian, or is it going to move away and not take Ian with it? And the influence, you basically want to be somewhere ahead of the trough. You don't want to be behind it. If you're behind the trough, then you miss the bus because this wind is flowing in this direction. So if you get behind it, you just miss it. Where if you're out ahead of it and you catch the wave per se, you get out of town. But if you don't, you get stuck behind, and that's kind of what we're talking about. So on the GFS, for example, we go into Wednesday, the trough leaves, and Ian just slowly moves up into the Gulf of Mexico as the steering flow begins to lighten up, and it's just going to lazily revolve around this ridge, and it is slowing down. Now, in the GFS scenario, we'll look at this in a little bit different light here. This is a Earth map using the GFS model. As we go into Wednesday, the trough begins to exit, and the GFS kind of rounds the base of this upper level high. And wind shear should become an issue for Ian if it gets to this point. But it would still be a pretty strong hurricane. But this is why the GFS thinks the more western solutions are in play as this trough begins to lead. Now, the European model, as we go down the line here, let's go to 18Z Wednesday on the Euro. The Euro has the trough hanging about. See how much further back the trough is on the euro? This allows Ian to turn a little more. This keeps the high edge weaker, and Ian turns more into southwest Florida. So on the GFS, that 588 line is pushing Ian. Like, notice the 588 line here is all the way over by Florida. This is pushing Ian further west. On the euro, the 588 line is over here in the Bahamas, and this is allowing more of a weakness for Ian to turn sooner and go up into Florida and southwest Florida. So that's kind of the delicate balance we have here, and it's really hard to say. The GFS has been adamant on its Western solution, where the euro is starting to shift more. We're also seeing the overnight, guidance, the suite of models, if you will, the statistical dynamical sort of models are also shifting more west. The Hurricane Center's track lies on that eastern edge of the envelope, kind of more with the euro right now, but it is also starting to shift, and the euro ensembles are shifting as well. The euro ensembles were the mean line was more into deep southwest Florida with about 30-40% of them off the coast, 30-40% into Tampa, and now that whole envelope has shifted back to the west, where the GFS has just been adamant the whole time that this will be more of a west coast storm, or western shift of the storm. So I think that we're gonna watch this carefully. Like I said in the short update, we're getting more weather balloon launches. We're gonna get more NOAA upper air pattern launches. We're gonna get a lot more information about how the overall weather pattern looks, and then our models will have a lot better idea. So I would start to pay attention to the shifts. I would not fall in love with them completely, but the shifts are starting to become important. The last couple of days, I didn't care when the model shifted because they didn't know anything yet. Oh, the Euro went here and GFS went here. Like, who cares? We don't even have a storm yet. Now we have a storm, and they're going to start getting better information. They get Hurricane Hunter data, and they get upper air data, and they get the NOAA upper air mission data. That all starts to matter. Now when they shift, that tells you something. That tells you something that you should pay attention to. So that's where we're going to start to focus on these models, and the potential outcomes for Florida remain questionable. So, like, the European shows still what would be kind of a worst case scenario, um, where the storm hooks faster off of Cuba and gets into the land sooner. This would avoid most of the shear interaction with the trough. This would likely be a Category 3 or 4 hurricane moving into somewhere between Naples, Fort Myers, Tampa region, which would be very damaging. That part of the Florida does not get a ton of hurricanes, and they probably haven't had one like that since Charlie in 2004. So that would be pretty bad. The GFS solution that brings it up further north, the GFS shows the hurricane pretty strong, but at this point, if the storm comes this much further north, so like again, the Euro is more like this right now, GFS is more up into the Big Bend or Western Florida, there would have to start to be some interaction. You can see a very well-defined cold front, 850 millibars on here, and this would no doubt be accompanying the storm with some sort of interaction with wind shear. I think if it comes this far west, you would say, oh well, it's got even more time over water, so it could be a 4 or a 5. Well, not necessarily. You would think that you would start to see wind shear become an issue again. This upper trough, if we go back, this is the same GFS model, just shown different. If I move this up into Wednesday into Thursday, or at least at the end of the model here, you can see there's a healthy amount of wind shear beginning to impart on the storm. So the hope would at least be that it could be starting to come down. The Hurricane Center official forecast is more in line with that GFS solution, and at the end of the forecast anyway, and they show it beginning to come back down. They think it'll peak somewhere north of Cuba, and then it could be weakening. I don't want to say that it would be, but it could be coming down. So there's a couple different potential outcomes. A faster, stronger hurricane, or a still pretty strong but not quite as fast hurricane, and then maybe a even slower moving hurricane that is weakening but would start to exacerbate a flooding rainfall threat for the northern Florida peninsula. And this is also going to spread a lot of tropical storm force winds over the region. So, I don't want to get into specifics of who's going to get what and what miles per hour yet, because we really don't have that confidence in the track and in the location uncertainty yet. But I just want to say that there's a lot of potential outcomes today, and it really hinges on how that trough plays with Ian in the short term, and even in the shorter term, how far west Ian tracks before that northern turn begins. So this is one to keep watching, guys. Again, like I said in the other video, have your plan, be on standby, and understand that even if you live far inland, you live in northern Florida, you live in southern Georgia, even Mississippi, Alabama, this doesn't mean you're not going to get impacts. Even if it hits like somewhere else, this could be a big impact for the state of Florida on the whole, and not just a localized event. So tropical storm conditions can still bring down trees, knock out power. A lot of flooding rain could be a problem with this storm, especially if it's slowing down. So there's a lot to unpack with Ian. A lot of things are going to fall into place over the next couple of days. We'll have all the updates here, and we will be tracking every step of the way. But it's going to take a little bit more time to get some clarity on this one. But as soon as we have it, we will bring it to you. So, always, guys, thanks for watching, and have a good one.